Okay, thank you. Good afternoon and welcome, and Ramadan Kareem for those that are fasting. I'm Frances Guy. I'm Chief Executive of Scotland's International Development Alliance, and we're very happy to be hosting this webinar in collaboration with the panel of the Scottish Government's Humanitarian Emergency Fund, which I also have the privilege of chairing. And just so that you're all clear about what we're going to do now in the next hour or so, I'm just going to do a very quick introduction about the situation in Sudan and a little bit about the Humanitarian Emergency Fund so that we all know what we're talking about. And then we'll hear a short snippet from the Scottish Government's Cabinet Secretary for Constitution, External Affairs and Culture, Angus Robertson. And then we'll hear from Tearfund, Islamic Relief and Christian Aid from Chad, Sudan and South Sudan. And then hopefully, I'm hoping that we'll have time for some questions, because I'm very conscious that there's a lot of very interesting people on this call who may have something to say or want to ask questions. And if you want to put anything in the chat as we go along, please do so. Otherwise, I'll do my best to ensure that we have some interactive chance to talk at the end. So thank you again for joining us. You probably don't need reminding, but this horrific crisis escalated in 2023, so that's nearly 2 years ago, when a long-standing rivalry between the Sudanese armed forces and the Rapid Support Force erupted into a civil war. The fighting started in Khartoum, but rapidly spread to the whole country, and Darfur, which has suffered now for many years, has again suffered arguably the most in this current civil war. You'll get an idea from this map of the extent of the problem. Around 25 million people are acutely short of food. A growing number of areas, particularly in Darfur, are already moving into what the United Nations would describe as an acute famine. Around 9 million people inside Sudan have been forced from their homes, and I suspect actually that's an underestimate. I suspect there's a lot more than that. And we shouldn't be surprised that there are millions of people who have actually left Sudan altogether. A number of leading UK charities are still working in Sudan, but the people who are most at risk are in, as ever, the areas that are most difficult and the most dangerous to reach. But I would also like to say that despite all of those terrible figures, what we really have seen in Sudan is an incredible solidarity amongst the Sudanese people and a real attempt for everybody to help each other. And whilst that's not going to make up for that, for the need on the failed harvests and the continued fighting and the lack of supplies, it is something that has been truly remarkable to see. The most extreme situation at the moment seems to be in and around Zamzam camp in northern Darfur, where nearly all humanitarian operations have been ceased because of intense fighting. And as I said, it's no great surprise that many people have fled into Chad and South Sudan. The UN estimates that $6 billion is needed to pay for an effective humanitarian response. And it's very regrettable that the cuts to the USAID budget and the cuts to funding from the United Kingdom, France, Germany, and the Netherlands, which has all happened in the last couple of months, are going to have a serious impact on whether any of that relief is going to be delivered or not. So that's the rather difficult overall context. But let me tell you a little bit now about the Scottish Government's Humanitarian Emergency Fund. It's a £1 million annual fund, which is split between crises which get significant media attention in the United Kingdom, like the ongoing conflict in Ukraine and Gaza. But the fund also seeks to respond to crises like Sudan, which get less media coverage. And it's an attempt to highlight that these other crises are also going on. In the past few years, the Scottish Government has actually topped up this £1 million and has spent about £4 million annually on humanitarian relief. The HEF consists of, of 8 Scottish-based charities who advise the Scottish Government on where to spend these limited funds and then bid for some of these funds in a competitive peer-reviewed process to ensure that it's the most appropriate and cost-effective response. I don't know if it's quite unique, but it's a very collaborative process with much to recommend it. Given the scale of crisis in Sudan, the fund has actually been used 3 times recently to support humanitarian charities there. Shortly after the crisis erupted in 2023, the British Red Cross received £125,000 to support people escaping the violence inside Sudan, and Oxfam received the same amount to support refugees who had crossed the border into South Sudan. And we're going to see now, hopefully, a very short video from Oxfam about that response. Maybe. Okay. We beg your patience.
I'm working for Oxfam, so we are going to give you some assistance. This money will help in buying food, medication. 09
لما صرفنا القروش ده صرفتها في زين وصرفت عليها 108 نفر القروش ده قاعدين نصرفوا بها واشترينا ذرة ناكلوها.
I would like to thank the Scottish Government for providing Oxfam with funding that has helped those people that are running away from the Sudan crisis and find themselves again in the flooding crisis caused by climate change. Climate change is real and is here. The effects are being felt everywhere, affecting people, communities who have nothing to do with the greenhouse emissions.
Okay, thank you. That's a very timely reminder that there is all other crises in the region as well as the civil war, which are impacting on everybody. Just to carry on a little bit of description of what other funding there's been. In the run up to Christmas last year, a further £375,000 was released and shared between 3 HEF members who we're going to hear from today. That's Tearfund in Chad, Islamic Relief in Sudan, and Christian Aid in South Sudan. And we'll hear a little bit about these projects very shortly, but first of all, we're going to hear from the Cabinet Secretary Angus Robertson, who sends his apologies for not being able to be with us in person, but has sent a short video. So beg your patience again while we get that sorted. Thank you.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity to address you today at a time of unprecedented challenge for the humanitarian community worldwide. I want to begin by recognising the invaluable work of the members of the Scottish Government-funded Humanitarian Emergency Panel. Since 2016, your expertise and dedication have strengthened Scotland's response to crises worldwide, ensuring that our aid reaches those who need it most swiftly and effectively. Perhaps even more importantly, your collaboration with local partners on the ground who work directly with some of the world's most vulnerable communities, some of whom are also represented here today. I therefore also want to take this opportunity to thank you for your frontline work in humanitarian crises. Conflicts are becoming more protracted, climate disasters more frequent, and displacement has reached record levels. Yet, at a time when humanitarian needs are soaring, recent cuts to humanitarian funding by USAID and UK Aid have left many organisations struggling to sustain their life-saving work. The impact of these funding reductions is severe, disproportionately affecting the most vulnerable communities and placing even greater strain on those delivering aid on the ground. Within this context, Sudan stands as one of the most urgent humanitarian emergencies of our time. Since conflict erupted almost 2 years ago, famine has been recorded in multiple locations. More than 12 million people have been displaced, and a staggering 25 million people are estimated to be in need of humanitarian aid. Despite this suffering, the crisis remains underreported and woefully underfunded. Women and girls, in particular, face heightened risks with widespread reports of gender-based violence and severe protection challenges. Urgent action is needed to ensure that humanitarian aid includes robust protection measures and support for survivors. Scotland cannot and will not turn away. I'm pleased to announce that we will provide an additional £400,000 to address the crisis in Sudan and neighbouring countries. Since 2023, we've now provided a total of £1.275 million for this emergency. This funding, delivered through our Humanitarian Emergency Fund partners, will provide life-saving aid to those most in need. Today's webinar is a chance to hear from some of our HEF panel members and their local partners on the ground who are responding to the crisis in Sudan. I again want to thank them for their continued dedication, commitment and courage as they continue responding to this crisis. Scotland may be a small nation, but our voice is strong and our actions matter. We will continue to stand in solidarity with the people of Sudan and all those facing disasters, disease and conflict worldwide. We will continue to support the humanitarian community and call for a world where no crisis is ignored and no life is left behind. We'll not let Sudan become another forgotten humanitarian crisis. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm sure we would all share those sentiments. So just to clarify, there'll be 4 projects that receive that extra money shared between them. It's 100,000 for Tearfund, for Islamic Relief, for Oxfam and for Christian Aid. And now we're going to hear directly from one of those projects. So we're going to start with Tearfund in Chad. And I'm pleased to introduce their country director, Seid Zebe, who is currently joined us from Chad. Thank you, Seid, for being with us. And Lorna, who's a panel member here with us in Scotland. Over to you.
Great, thanks, and good afternoon, everyone. My name's Lorna and I represent Tearfund on the HEF panel. Just to explain really briefly who Tearfund is, if you haven't come across us before, we're a Christian charity. We work to address poverty and injustice in some of the most vulnerable contexts across the world. And we're registered in the UK, but we work in 35 countries, mainly in Africa, Asia and the Middle East. And we've been involved in humanitarian response for over 55 years now. So about 1/3 of our work will be humanitarian. We also support long-term development work in a number of areas, including agriculture, livelihoods, climate mitigation and adaptation, food security, water and sanitation, peace building, and a number of other areas. And we also advocate for policy change so that we can address the root causes of poverty and injustice. And as the Cabinet Secretary mentioned, he talked about localisation. Localisation is in our DNA. So we're really committed to working through local partners, believing that they are best placed to understand and to respond to the needs of our communities. And one of the countries that we work in is in Chad in West Africa. I'm delighted that we've got our country director, Seid, with us today to share a little of what we're doing to support those affected by the Sudan crisis who've fled to Chad. And I'm really grateful to the Scottish Government for the funding that has enabled this work. So over to you, Seid, to tell us more. Thanks.
Thank you, Lorna. Thank you all. And once again, thank you for this opportunity given to Tearfund here in Chad to tell you what we are doing. I think to start with, Tearfund, our mission, as we said, Lorna, is really to fight poverty, injustice, and to help people
I wonder if we've lost
speak
sight
for
connection
themselves. In Chad is one of the biggest country. Come in that area also, we are working with the
Oh, I'm afraid we've lost Seid's connection there. I could maybe tell you a little of what he was going to say while we wait for Seid to connect again. I'll just check. Seid, are you there? I think we've maybe lost his connection. I don't know if we've got the slides up, Hugh. I'll just fill in at the moment, but if Seid comes back, he can take over. So the Sudanese conflict, as we've spoken about, has had a devastating impact on millions of families, forcing them to look for refuge in neighbouring countries. And around 760,000 people have been hosted in Chad since the beginning of the war 2 years ago. So a massive amount of refugees have fled to Chad. And, you know, Seid can talk much more articulately than I about, you know, he's seen firsthand the desperate situation that refugees are in the Zebe refugee camp near the border with Sudan. And that camp has over 57,000 people. The majority of whom, I think it's about 80%, 87% are women and children who fled from the conflict in Sudan. And more refugees are arriving at the camp every day. So the conditions there are really difficult. Resources are overstretched. Food is scarce, and many refugees have experienced really harrowing sexual and gender-based violence. I'm just going to pause to see if Seid's there. If not, we can go on to the next slide. Seid, are you there? No, okay, I'll carry on to the next slide. So Tearfund, we've identified those most in need of multi-purpose emergency cash assistance to buy food and other vital supplies. So in total, I think it's 2,701 households, so that's over 16,000 people will be reached in Zebe camp with that support, and the distributions are literally about to happen any day now. And households are going to receive just under £60 each, which is the amount that has been recommended by all the actors in the area as to what should give people the most vital support at this time. So that's the first outcome, the multipurpose emergency cash. The second outcome, next slide, thanks, is we're seeking to solve the immediate social cohesion needs. So you can imagine people coming from lots of different places. You've also got people who already live in that area in Chad. There are social tensions. There are also tensions within families. And so Tearfund are already doing a lot of work with the communities to try and improve social cohesion. We've got social dialogues going on there. We've also adopted what's called a transforming masculinities approach. So we have trained 40 gender champions who will engage in dialogue sessions with 600 people. So our transforming masculinities approach aims to promote positive gender norms by engaging men and faith leaders in challenging harmful belief and behaviour, fostering gender equality and preventing gender-based violence. We found many people who've arrived at the camp have experienced violence as a result of the conflict, but there's also a lot of gender-based violence within families. And that work has already started. And one of the men that Seid met in the who'd been part of the training. I'll just give a quote from him. He said, "Since the inception of this camp, there's never been training of this type. This is the most important training, teaching us how to value, appreciate, and live peacefully with one another. The teaching should reach every nook and cranny of the community of Zebe." So that was a testimony from someone who's recently been part of that training. And then the slide that you can see on you, this is the chief imam of the camp. He's also been heavily involved in this work with Tearfund, and he said, "This is an important training that tells us the truth and protects us from harming each other and living peacefully. If every family and head of household gathered here today abides to the principles, gender-based violence will be reduced, and men will no longer beat their wives but accept them in love. Also, women will appreciate their husbands more and value their contributions. It would translate to peace in the homes and the entire community of Zebe." So that work has started and is continuing. And also with the HEF funding, we've been able to start the vital protection work supporting women in the camp, if you want to go on to the next slide. So we're supporting women who've experienced sexual and gender-based violence and supporting them to begin that healing process. So the picture here is of some of those who are survivors of sexual and gender-based violence. And they've been trained in our Journeying to Healing approach, and they are now going to reach out to 100 more survivors in the camp, really working in solidarity to support one another, to counsel one another, to provide psychological relief to their peers. And we've worked with the UNHCR and Inter-SOS in this programme. And it's just to give you a flavour of the people involved in this at the moment, one of the women shared that in her marriage of 11 years, she's had 7 children. She's now expecting her 8th child. And she was just crying out that her husband had threatened to divorce her if she does any type of family planning. Her husband had divorced his first wife for that reason. And she was just saying, you know, the danger that she feels in at the moment because of that. Another girl shared how she was forcibly married at the age of 11. Absolutely tragic, and she ran to the Zebe camp as a means of escape, and she knows that her husband has been in search for her. And there's another lady who was there who had been stabbed by her husband. So tragic situations, tragic stories, and it's absolutely vital that these women are able to speak out, able to support one another. And that starts a journey of healing. We're not going to pretend that that journey of healing will be finished by the end of the project, but we are training people so that they can work together to start and continue on that healing. And we're doing this all through a local partner in the area. So the additional funds announced by the Scottish Government today are really enabling us to expand our reach significantly and that work significantly, providing a lifeline for those who've lost everything and seeing more families live peacefully and receive the help they so desperately need. So we're really grateful for that funding, and hopefully Seid will be able to come online and answer any questions that you have.
Thank you, Lorna. I'm sorry we lost Seid in the middle of it. And as you say, hopefully we'll have time for questions at the end, and hopefully he'll be back and can answer something about what it looks like from Chad itself. So thank you. I'm very happy now to hand over to the Director of Islamic Relief UK, Tufail Hussain, who was in Sudan last year, and Islamic Relief, I believe, are working in Gadaref region of Sudan, but please correct me if that's not right. Over to you, Tufail.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, all. So Islamic Relief is a humanitarian and development organization that's working in over 30 countries across the world in some of the most difficult and hard to reach areas, which includes Gaza, where we've spent over £40 million since the 7th of October brutal conflict started. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank the Scottish Government for their support towards our Sudanese crisis appeal. This support was so vital considering the challenges we've had in trying to secure funding for our programs on the ground. We've received 2 grants, as you've already mentioned, £125,000, which is both grants are being delivered in Gadaref, which is one of the most desperately affected areas in Sudan. And that the £125,000 will be supporting 504 households, and that will provide cash grants to the tune of around £124 per family. And so those families have been identified. We have set up bank accounts for those families, and we're in the process of now transferring those funds. And today we're actually going to be distributing dignity kits to those families as well. And the additional £100,000, which is again really we're really thankful for, that's going to help us to scale up this current program, and that will help us to reach a further 704 families, households, with cash grants, again of around £124. So vital life-saving efforts, and we are truly thankful to the Scottish Government for this. I just want to put into perspective the scale of the crisis. You mentioned some numbers there, and the figure that we have is around 11 million people displaced inside Sudan. And just think about this for a moment. That's equivalent to the population of Ireland and Scotland. So imagine everybody in Ireland and Scotland being displaced with nothing but the clothes on their back into the countryside, and being put in this very desperate state. But behind every number, there is a very desperate story of trauma, of hardship, and of pain. And when I was there in October, I visited both Port Sudan and Gedaref. And in Port Sudan, I met a mother by the name of Aisha. She was a mother of 5 children. And she was originally from Khartoum, where she lived with her husband. And she witnessed atrocities there, which included her neighbor's home being bombed and everybody killed in that bombing. She had to escape under the cover of darkness with 4 of her children. Unfortunately, her husband had to stay back because he was suffering from acute asthma. And they left their eldest son to look after the father. Sadly, 2 days before I met Aisha, her husband, she found out that her husband had died, and that's because of the very difficult curfew, the very strict curfew in Khartoum, which didn't allow people to leave their homes even for food or water. You have cases of people starving in their own homes in Khartoum, starving to death. And this gentleman unfortunately died because he couldn't seek medical care for his issue. She doesn't know where her son is now, and she's now in this very desperate state in this camp, which I'll try and describe to you. I mean, it's a camp that has tents, but has very little else. When I was visiting families, you could see inside there were very little possessions. And Aisha's there with her 4 children. She herself now, she suffers from a heart defect. She doesn't know if she'll live another day because there are no medical facilities in the camp. And there's very little food for the families. There were I think 2,000 to 3,000 individuals in this camp. And I witnessed one of those meals being delivered to this family. And it was the second and last meal of the day. And the only way I can describe it was lentils and pasta, but the size was equivalent to a Tesco meal deal here in the UK. And that's for a family of 5 and their second and last meal of the day. There are very little latrines, so people being forced to openly defecate in this camp. Very little, not enough water for the people there. So it was just a very desperate state. But I also witnessed young children with protruded stomachs as well, which was an early sign of malnutrition. But what I saw in Gedaref, which is where we're delivering the Scottish Government project, truly shocked me. So we arrived into Gedaref at this reception centre, which hadn't been supported by any aid agency. And we drove in, and as soon as we opened the door, I was hit with this awful stench of sewage, clearly indicating that people were being forced to openly defecate. And when I looked up, I saw this horrific sight. I mean, it was just like out of a horror movie. You had 20,000 people crammed into this very small space. It was an abandoned warehouse, and there was no wall on this warehouse, and these people were just crammed in this very small space. They had no possessions. They were living virtually on top of each other. So there was no privacy, and you could see that they were starving. We were immediately surrounded by the community leaders, who just pleaded with us, saying that we're struggling. We're not even getting 1 meal a day, and this is something that the site that I saw there is something we're accustomed to as humanitarian workers in the early days of a humanitarian catastrophe or crisis. This was 18 months on. Many of these families were in this desperate state for over 4 months, and they had received no support. Thankfully, we were able to immediately start distribution of food the very next day to families there, and we had also committed, and that was set up a camp which would take the 1,000 of the most vulnerable 1,000 of the most vulnerable families from that reception center, and again I'm really happy to say that that is where we're delivering the Scottish Government programme, and you know, I just think that what the families can do with that support it does fill me with a lot of hope. Despite the challenges, our teams are operational inside Sudan, and unfortunately, every member of our team has been displaced and is living in quite difficult conditions, but they're continuing their work heroically. So we're currently operational in Gadaref, Blue Nile, Port Sudan, North Kordofan, West Kordofan, Sinnar, Umdurman, Al Jazeera, and Central Darfur. Since the beginning of the conflict, we've reached over 1.2 million people, providing cash grants, nutrition, healthcare, shelter, psychosocial support. So our colleague from Tearfund mentioned the horrific crime of sexual abuse against women and children. I heard horrific stories about how militias were taking over villages and were forcing husbands and brothers to deliver their wives and their daughters and their sisters to the camps, to the military posts, and it was horrific. I can't even mention it again, but we are supporting those women by providing them with psychosocial support and safe spaces in some of these camps where they can come together and speak about the challenges that they faced and to try and share that burden. And we're also providing water and sanitation facilities in camps that we've helped set up across Sudan. And I just want to maybe very briefly talk about some of the challenges our teams are facing on the ground. If I may, do I have enough time for this? So I completely lost track of time.
You have lost a wee bit, but go on, but be quick, thank you.
Oh no, it's fine. You know what? I can
No, go
finish
for it, please. I don't want to stop you.
Okay, well, so there is currently a liquidity crisis in banks because of the recent currency replacement. So there is a daily limit on cash withdrawals. Money isn't available. It's impacting our cash distribution. So we're having to help set up bank accounts for people to distribute through online bank transfers, cash. And there are issues, of course, with access across the country and insecurity, which is still a major issue. Some roads are still closed, unfortunately. Even when I was there, I found it very difficult to move from Port Sudan to Gadaref. It took us days to get permission. There are clashes and artillery shelling and airstrikes in West and North Kordofan, Central Darfur and Khartoum, which is impeding humanitarian efforts. And we're now not just supporting IDPs but also returnees, because the Sudanese army have taken back some areas, which includes Sinnar and Al Jazeera and Was Madani. But of course, then returnees are now going back to a very desperate state. So we're helping these returnees with humanitarian support and also to help rebuild their lives through rebuilding their homes and livelihoods. And inflation is very high and it's fluctuating, which is leading to suppliers declining agreements once they've been signed, and the cost of implementation is becoming extremely expensive. I've finished with thanking again the Scottish Government for its leadership on this issue. We just need the rest of the world to stand up and help bring an end to this crisis.
Thank you, Tufail. It's really important to hear that some of the stories behind the big numbers that we've been talking about, and being reminded about the multi-dimensional bit of it, including people returning to devastated homes. So I really appreciate that. Thank you very much. I know that Seid has managed to rejoin us, but I'm going to carry on because we also can have potential connectivity problems with South Sudan. So we're going to go now to Christian Aid in South Sudan, if that's okay. And I'm going to welcome James Wani, who I hope is with us in South Sudan. and Val from Christian Aid here in Edinburgh. So over to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Francis. Good afternoon, everybody. I just wanted to start with a very short overview. Christian Aid, very much like Islamic Relief and Tearfund, exists to support some of the world's poorest people, and we work in around 30 countries around the world. This is actually our 80th anniversary, and we were set up at the end of the Second World War by the British and Irish churches specifically to support the refugees in Europe. And from there, we now have a global programme, and we work with people of all faiths and none. Alongside our humanitarian work and our long-term development work, we also advocate against the systems and structures which we believe keep people poor. But again, just wanted to say a huge thank you to the Scottish Government for the Humanitarian Emergency Fund. What that fund does is really enable us to scale up work and support people when they're at their most vulnerable. And I'm going to hand over now to James, who will tell you a wee bit more about how that money is used.
Valerie, and thank you so much, Francis, for moderating this. So Valerie, if you can make that bigger. The slide mode. Great. I just want to say, since the start of the conflict in Sudan in 2023, April of 2023, South Sudan has become one of the biggest refugee hosting country. By the end of last year, we had already reached over 1 million mark of refugees, and majority of those refugees South Sudan is hosting from Sudan, and they relate to the current conflict that has had a spillover not only into South Sudan, but also Chad, Ethiopia, and other neighboring countries. Prior to the conflict in Sudan, South Sudan has also had one of the longest protracting humanitarian crises. Christian Aid has been active in South Sudan since the 70s. We are one of the longest serving humanitarian and development organization in South Sudan. And prior to the conflict, we've had a long-term program in Northern Borogazal, which is one of the refugee hosting states, and is also where the funding from the Scottish government is making the much needed difference in the life of refugees and returnees who have fled the conflict in Sudan into South Sudan, also to find themselves in a very desperate context. Now, our program had to adapt to also include support for refugees and returnees from the conflict in Sudan. The needs both within the host communities and the refugees are very huge. According to Humanitarian Needs Overview for 2020-2025, there are already 9.5 million people in need of humanitarian assistance.
James, you're fading a wee bit. Can you come closer to the microphone?
Hello, can you hear me?
That's a bit better.
Testing. Can you hear me?
Thank you.
It looks like it's my computer. I thought I was using the headset, the other mic, yeah. So I hope you were able to hear my introductory remarks. Over 1 million refugees in South Sudan since the start of the conflict. Now, this figure has been pushed to this limit because of the crisis, of course, in the Sudan. Now, Christian Aid is operating in one of the states that is hosting one of the largest refugees from Sudan in South Sudan. Now, our long-term program in Northern Borogazal, where we are supporting refugees and returnees with the funds we have received from the Scottish government, is one of the states where we have been working with our partners lately with through the support that we have received. The needs both within the host communities and the refugees is so huge, because prior to this conflict, South Sudan is already a protracted crisis with very huge need. The projection for last year alone, it's more than three-quarters of the population in need of humanitarian assistance. And through supports that has been received, only close to less than half of those that are in need have been targeted. So the needs varies from climate-driven needs, climate-induced needs, for example, long spell of dry spell that affects crops, flooding that has also been destroying livelihoods. We have, as a result, we have huge needs around food insecurity. Water and sanitation is a big challenge, and that has also resulted into waterborne diseases, particularly cholera. That has also now been reported in the refugee camp because of the overcrowding and the poor hygiene condition. There is a huge challenge. So the funds from the Scottish government has come in a very timely way, especially at this particular moment when other countries and major donors, including US government, have been cutting down on AIDS. Through the funds we have received, for example, this year, what we have been able to bridge a very huge gap. One of the things that I want to highlight is that since last year, the population of the camp has more than doubled. And we have, in the month of March, when our colleagues are on the ground, within a week, they were able to they record additional 5,000 refugees that have arrived within a period of 1 month. So there is a very huge need on the ground. Through the support that we have received through the Scottish government, we were able to prioritize 2,000 individuals within the refugee camps, targeting the most vulnerable, particularly child-headed household, those with chronic illnesses, and those that have arrived either with having children that are unaccompanied and so on. But because also there are needs within the host community, we were able also to target about 445 households. Again, thanks to the Scottish government, after our first initial intervention, we have also received additional 100,000 British pound. And this funding is enabling us to scale this current response. You can imagine how difficult it is to target a population of about 17,000, where everybody has not been receiving, adequate ration, especially following the cut of ration by WFP. So it was very challenging. So the additional 100,000 that we have received, we are going to target additional 2,000 individual, but also 600 household from the host communities. So it's going to make a very huge difference in terms of addressing the vulnerability associated both with the conflict, but also ongoing chronic crisis in South Sudan. And I just want to highlight a story of one of these beneficiaries that we have targeted. The picture you are seeing there is of Akech. Akech fled Sudan because of the conflict in Khartoum. He lost the husband and one of his eldest son on the way. She was only able to grab some little cash and a few clothes as she fled the assault on her village. When she arrives in her home village of Gomjur East, because that is where the husband comes from, she found herself in a situation where she had to survive. So she has been struggling to feed the family by selling firewood, and a bundle of firewood can earn only about 1,000 South Sudanese pound. That is so, that's like 1 cent. And with that, she could not do much to feed her 6 children. So when we targeted a catch, we provided her and the family 3,223 South Sudanese pound. That is equivalent of about 59 British pound. That amount of money is what she would have earned in 1 full year. Because of that support, she was able to register her children to school, buy clothes, and also buy much needed food, including some nutritional need because she has not been able to provide adequate food for her children. So you can see that because of the support people like Akech receive, it was able to make a big difference in her life. So there are many more people, both within the host communities and in the refugee settings. So we really thank the Scottish government because of the support that they are able to provide, and this support is making very huge difference in the life of many who are like Akech. I just want to highlight, we still
Thank
continue.
you, James. I'm going to cut you off because we've really only got 10 minutes left. And yes, despite your promises, you were a wee bit long. And I'm also conscious that poor Seid didn't get a chance to speak. So I just wondered if he is there, if he wanted to maybe say something about that same kind of challenge that South Sudan has, which is that the people in South Sudan were already suffering. I just wondered if that's a little bit the same in Chad too, if you wanted to say something about that. James, we'll get back to you if someone has a question for you, okay?
Thank you, thank you.
Thank you, Francis. Yes, I think the challenges are there, and what I would like just to say is this money from the Scottish government has gave hope to people that have lost everything. And also, you know, when we hear from those beneficiaries crying and starting the process of healing, I think this is something for us is very important. And this, again, an opportunity for me to say really thank you. In Arabic, we say shukran. Shukran a lot in the name of all those that are receiving this fund. It's very important. Thank you so much.
La shukr al wajib, ya Seid. I don't think you should be thanking us. We should be thanking you for all your hard work. Thank you. We'd be very happy to open the floor for anybody. I don't think we've got anything in the chat, but if anybody wanted to wave their hand, I know there are people on this call who have their own experience in Sudan, who might want to share something. That's better. I can see everyone. If please, you know, indicate with your hand if you want to say something else. No, everybody's shocked into submission.
Hi, Francis.
Yes, go on.
Patrick from SIDA, thank you. I've got a question. It's very interesting how cash transfers are such a big part of all of the responses, or most of the responses that we've heard from. Wondered, you know, what assessment is being made of the effectiveness of cash transfers, and in particular, is the infrastructure there to support that? If people are being given cash, is there still markets, or in fact, are they stimulating local markets to make sure that the necessities that people need can be bought with the cash that they're given? Because, you know, we know this is an effective way, but are we seeing real evidence of that? I'd be interested to hear. Thank you.
James, do you want to answer that?
Yes, yeah. No, I think cash has made a very huge difference. One of the things that we noted, you know, before we did the first cash distribution through support from the Scottish government, there was no big market around the refugee camp. But after we did the cash distribution, it was just like a fertilizer that was, just provided for a new seedling. The entire camp was surrounded by a market. It became a very big pull factor for basic necessities, including other items that would have required refugees to travel for 3 to 4 hours on foot to acquire. So we've really seen that cash has really been a very big boost for improving people access to basic goods and services. But also what we have seen is that the Sudanese refugees are very entrepreneurial. They are very resilient. Whenever they have some cash, they will prioritize to invest in business so that they will continue to be able to provide for themselves, support their family needs, and so on. And we have some very beautiful stories around those that we have supported, who have decided who have always not spend the money all, but also make sure that they could invest it in small business so that they can continue to provide support even when there is the resources, the additional support is not there.
Thank you. We have a question also in the chat. I don't know if Mark, you want to come in. If not, you go on.
Yeah, I will, Francis. It's more just interest in picking up on the point about the financial services. My experience in South Sudan, was that financial services were the key enabler of any relief effort in the camps. And I'm just wondering the extent to which that's better developed now than it was back in 2012 when I was there. I think it's a key infrastructure point in humanitarian relief generally.
Yeah. And I think for our experience, it has really helped us with the agility and the speed at which we can respond, because most of the time the service providers can pre-finance, so making it easy for us to really move with the required speed to provide support and ensure that people can start improving their livelihood immediately, once funds are approved from the donor. Yeah, thanks, Mark, for.
Can I pass that question to Tufail maybe? I mean, I would be surprised in the picture of doom that you painted that mobile money things are an option, but am I very wrong about that? You need to unmute.
Sorry about that. The question in the chat.
Well, that Mark just posed as well was really about whether there's mobile money or other means available rather than physical cash, I think.
Yeah, so we've obviously now tried to mitigate against the risk of cash not being made available by helping our rights holders to open bank accounts, and that's the way that we've overcome the challenge of the cash liquidity in the country.
Okay, thank you. Yes, Ian McCauley's waving his hand, and then we have another question in the chat. Go on, Ian. You need to unmute. Thank you.
I was wondering, you talked about the process of healing within the support mechanism there, and I just wondered, in addition to the gender-based violence as being addressed, is there a sectarian element to the conflict and to the targeting, particularly in Gezira state, which is a center of Sufism? And we know that some of the belligerents within the conflict view Sufism as a heresy. And I just wondered to what extent that might be driving the violence and the brutality that's been described today.
I can come in that, Francis, very quickly.
Go on.
So our teams heard stories of I can't remember the region. It's gone out of my head now. But we had rights holders, we had IDPs arriving into our camps, and they were telling us horrific stories about how militia were basically taking aside people that were from a certain ethnicity and who they thought were from sort of the South Sudan area, and they were literally taking them on the streets, taking them to a side and shooting them on the streets in front of everyone. It was awful. I don't know I've not heard anything about atrocities being committed on the lines of sort of branches of faith like Sufism and Salafism or whatever. I've not heard anything about that, but I have heard on ethnic lines. There's certain people have certainly been targeted because we've heard about that, and sadly.
Thank you. Alice had her hand up, but seems to have gone down again. Alice, did you want to come in?
Sorry, I've taken my hand down to allow Tijani to come in, but I'll come in after them if there's still time.
Yes, okay. Tijani, happy for you to tell us a little bit about what you're doing.
Hello. Yeah, we are based in Aberdeen in Scotland, and we have a small charity helping Sudan and Sudanese people for the last few years. At the moment, we are helping by supporting some food banks, providing meals in River Nile State for displaced people, helping with the Ramadan meals. And I just wanted to ask about the opportunities for small charities like ours to benefit from the Scottish Government funds so that we can upscale a little bit further, especially that we do work directly with needy people, less staffed, but still ready to help. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that's perfect. Alice can reply to your question, perhaps. Alice is from the Scottish Government Humanitarian Fund. Go on, Alice.
Thanks, Frances. Thanks, everybody. Thank you for the really, really powerful testimonies today. I think it's really important to hear those stories from the ground and from yourself. So thank you to all the panelists today. And thank you to the Humanitarian Emergency Fund partners for your work in delivering this funding. I recognize that the very small amount of funding that we're able to provide is a drop in the ocean to the scale of need that there is. And I know that there's a lot of noise at the moment with so much conflict and so many crises around the world at the moment. So just to encourage us all to kind of raise awareness of that. In terms of other smaller partners, I think we have a review of our humanitarian funding ongoing at the moment and are keen to hear from organizations who are not actually members of the Humanitarian Emergency Fund. So if you would like, Tijani, I'm happy to add your contact details to the list of people who would be consulted within that review. You can just let me know in the chat if you're happy for me to do that. But yes, just really to share my appreciation for all the panelists today and all the teams on the ground and the teams here in Scotland doing this important work. Thank you.
Thank you, Alice. And I would just say to reiterate a little bit to Jenny's point, we've highlighted the 4 organisations today that have been in receipt of this the funds from the Scottish Government, and because the Scottish Government has today announced an increase in that funding. But we're very conscious that there are many other people working in Sudan and working to help people where they can. And we, certainly as Scotland's International Development Alliance, we'd be very happy to highlight any of that work in our newsletter or whatever, because as I said at the beginning, we talk about many crises as being the world's biggest humanitarian crisis at the moment, unfortunately, but Sudan is definitely one of them, and it's suffered and is suffering even more because of all these aid cuts that are going on. So the more that anybody can do to bring attention to this crisis, to also bring attention to the good work that is happening, encourage all of you to write to your MPs and MSPs as well, if you can. Everything you can do makes a difference, whatever little bit it is. As I said, we're highlighting these 4 charities today, but there are lots of other people doing a lot of really great work in Sudan, including Sudanese, as I said at the beginning, for themselves. So I'd like to thank you all for joining us. Thank you those in particular who shared their testimony. Thank you for all the great work that you're doing. And I hope that we'll continue this series somehow. Thank you. And I think
you, Frances.
You were going to share an end slide, but never mind. Thank you.